We have a fairly special breed of cars with us here today, the Ford Figo diesel and the Maruti Suzuki Swift diesel. Now both these cars are a whole lot of fun to drive. They're very reliable cars, they come feature packed, and when you actually go out to buy one, they won't break the bank either. Now the Figo has recently received an update, so it was the perfect excuse for us to drive this car once again. So we got the Swift back in the picture as well. But this is the Indian market, you have to remember. So you have to have a sensible option in this space. And that option is represented by the Hyundai Grand i10. Now this car may not be as fun to drive as the other two cars here, but it definitely is the most premium offering in the segment. So without further ado, let the games begin. Now for the purposes of this test, we've got Ford's top-end variant of the Figo, which is the Blue. Now this car is priced at 7.74 lakhs ex-showroom, while the Swift we have here is the ZDI variant and not the ZDI Plus variant, the top-end one. We've done this simply in the interest of fairness, as this car, the ZDI Swift, costs 7.58 lakhs, which is quite close to the Figo's price, and the i10 here is the top-end variant as well in the Asta, which costs 7.65 lakhs. So all of them here are on a level playing field. Now the Ford Figo diesel with its 1.5 litre turbo diesel engine has always been the most powerful car in its segment. Now right from the get-go, under linear acceleration, this car you don't have to change gear at all in traffic. The turbo of course comes on song just below 2000 RPM, but even then there's such good throttle response that it's very easy to drive this car in traffic. But once you step on it, that's when you'll realize that there is actually some turbo lag. Between 1500 RPM to about 1800 RPM where the turbo spools, that's when you'll realize that there is some lag. But in fact, if you're going to be driving in a spirited manner, for sure you'll be holding revolutions far above 2000 RPM. So on that account, once you start driving this car fast, it just takes off. So from 2000 RPM onwards, peak torque of 215 Newton meters kicks in and stays with you till 3000 RPM. So you have very good boost in that range, and the car actually feels very, very powerful. So once the turbo comes on, you can keep on pushing from 3000 RPM onwards, but you can still keep pushing. And with 99 horsepower being made after that, so this engine in fact has a very wide power band, and that is what really helps you use all of the power from this engine, and that's what makes this a really fast car. But now I want to talk about something else. The pre-facelift model that came with a sporty model, it was called the Figo S. That had bigger rims and tires, and it had stiffer suspension and quicker steering. Now Ford says that with this model, all they have done is fit the bigger wheels 195/55 R15 section tires on this car. But you know what? From here where I'm sitting, right now it feels like this car's suspension setup is stiffer than the standard Figo, and the steering definitely feels quicker to respond as well. So to me, it feels more like a Figo S has hidden underneath this blue avatar. So this quick steering, the stiff suspension setup, the powerful engine, all of this combines and comes together to make the Figo a really fast and fun car to drive, because this car will just sniff those corners, dart into them, come out of them, and it remains so confident under high-speed acceleration and high-speed bends and high-speed braking even because of the wide tires, that all in all, when you look at the whole package, this by far is the most fun car to drive of the trio we have here. Of course, the Swift has a more beautiful flair to the way it drives, it flows into corners and all of that, but this is fast, whether be it in corners or in straights. So this is out and out a driver's car, and if you're in the market for one of these, the Figo is one of those very few cars on the market that manage to put a smile on your face every time you get behind the wheel. Moving over to the gearbox, well, Ford has fit this new 5-speed gearbox in the Figo, but I have to say that this gearbox is not as good and not as smooth as the Swift's gearbox. For the clutch has a long travel to it, and the throws are quite long and notchy as well in this. Even though it's a new gearbox, I didn't really expect this from this one, but it is there. So this is nowhere close to the Swift gearbox. And in fact, I feel personally that this long clutch and the gear throws is going to slow down the 0 to 100 time of this car. So that is quite a realistic problem because the Swift performs very well on that front. Moving over to ride comfort, the Figo suspension setup may be stiffer, but it's still not uncomfortable in any way. The ride is very quiet and very pliant, and it dismisses potholes and road undulations in a fairly comfortable manner. While the Ford Figo is quite the compelling driver's car, let's now look at the car that actually appeals the most to people, the immensely popular Swift. From behind the wheel, the Swift diesel feels very refined to drive. Over time, Maruti has really quietened down this 1.3 litre multi-jet diesel engine. So the quietness combined with the linear power delivery of this turbo diesel engine means that this car is very easy to drive in the city. The steering is well weighed and is fairly direct in nature. Now the clutch pedal has very little travel in it, and the gear throws are very short, so it's very easy for you to change gears in this car and drive this car very easily. It feels very effortless, it feels very intuitive, and the steering wheel, once you speed up, it makes the car flow into a corner very smoothly and very easily in a very beautiful manner. So this car is very nice to drive. It's easy to drive as well as very nice to drive, and once you start pushing it, the engine will give you good power in the meat of the power band. Moving over to the suspension setup, Maruti has done a brilliant job. It's new cars, even the small cars, the suspension setup is so good. It's very pliant, it's very quiet and very comfortable. It doesn't throw you about inside the cabin. So overall, the ride comfort in this car is very, very good. My only complaint here comes in the form of the Bridgestone Ecopia tires. These are low rolling resistance tires designed to increase fuel efficiency. But the fact remains that these tires are very noisy. They have very low grip on loose and slippery surfaces, especially when the tarmac is wet and there's a pool of water that's collected. You can aquaplane as well. So I suggest to Swift buyers out there that you change the tires immediately after you buy this car. So better tires, more grippy ones, definitely will improve not just the ride comfort and braking performance, but also grip and handling of this car, where you'll be able to fully exploit this car's dynamic capabilities. And with that, it's now time to move over to the Hyundai Grand i10. The Hyundai Grand i10 has the smallest diesel engine of the lot of cars here, and that shows. Also, this 1.2 litre unit is very noisy in its initial stages. When you fire up the engine at that initial revs, when you're going back and forth, forward gear, reverse gear, so when you rev that engine, it's very noisy and there's a lot of diesel engine clatter that pours into the cabin. And that's because this is also a 3-cylinder engine, so it's bound to be more noisy in nature. Moving on, as you start driving along, you can sense that Hyundai has put in a lot of effort to calibrate this turbo to the engine, and the clutch pedal is actually very light as well, so that's going to further aid comfort in long distance journeys or in traffic conditions. So this car is very convenient to drive in urban environments, and the light steering too factors in over here, because that again makes this car very fatigue free to drive. But once you start going faster, once you start pushing, that's when you'll realize the flaws of this powertrain, because under hard acceleration or heavy acceleration at initial revs, from 1000 RPM there's no response. From 1500 RPM response starts to come in, but it's only past 2000 RPM that the turbo spools properly and you get a good amount of power down on the road. But then again, you have to remember that this power band is very narrow. So in terms of usability, it's the 2000 to 3000 RPM range where you can really exploit all of the power from this engine. Because once you push past 3000 RPM and 3500 RPM, the engine starts to get very noisy and power starts to taper off as well past 3500. Moving over to the comfort quotient, Hyundai again has done a decent job of making the suspension setup quite pliant. So this is abrupt road undulations and potholes. But in comparison to the other two cars here, over potholes and abrupt undulations on tarmac, the Grand i10 suspension is the noisiest amongst all the cars here, and indeed it is the bumpiest too. It's a really tough call to take then between the Swift and the Figo. Both these cars are huge amounts of fun to drive. Both of them come with their own pros. The Figo with its more powerful engine really steals the show here, but not just that, this still is the only car in the segment to come with 6 airbags. As a result, this is also the safest car here. The Swift on the other hand, it brings you in ZDI Plus variant, LED headlights, a brilliant infotainment system and so on. But choosing between the Swift and the Figo, ultimately I would have to go with the Figo, not just because of its more powerful engine, but also because of its sharper steering and suspension setup, which makes the drive all that more engaging. As for the Hyundai Grand i10, well, this one is still the most premium offering in the segment. Inside out, you can sense that build quality and that interior fit and finish inside the cabin. Everything is very high end and you have all the equipment that you need. Plus, it is a really comfortable car to drive. So if you need an urban runabout, the Grand i10 diesel is the car for you. But if you seek something with a little more spirit, well, these are your choices.